Hello everybody and welcome back to the Blossom Review. Today we are talking about literature and of course with the brand new Netflix show coming out tomorrow, The Trunk. Of course we're talking about The Trunk, a novel written by Kim Ryeo-ryeong. Apologies for my terrible Korean pronunciation. So I think I'm here today, guys, because I want to clear up a misunderstanding. This book is not a thriller. I am here today not just to review the book, but also to point out some differences between the show and the book. So just a quick introduction. So this review is spoiler free, so don't worry if you haven't read the book yet. So who is this woman? Kim Ryeo-ryeong is actually a very famous, very successful author in Korea. She has written several award-winning novels, but none of them have been translated into English. The Trunk is actually the very first, her very first book to be translated into English. The book was released in the UK on October 31st. I think right before the show, so we could grab a copy and read the book before the show comes out. But she's no stranger to adaptations. I don't know if you guys have watched them, but 2011's Punch and 2014's Thread of Lies were two very successful films that were based on her novels. Now, with the trailers and promotional videos and this very ambiguous blurb here, you would imagine that The Trunk is this very dark thriller with a healthy dose of feminism and satire, some sort of story based on a web of lies and intrigue. And that's not it. This is not The Trunk. Definitely not. I don't know what Netflix is preparing because I haven't watched the show yet. Maybe that's Netflix's take on the story, but this is definitely not this book. I think The Trunk is indeed an adventure, but not the adventure that we are being led to believe. So they've been trying to sell The Trunk as this feminist thriller, but The Trunk is more of an introspective, fairly satirical, social and cultural analysis of the absurdities that surround us in contemporary society. This is a book very light on plot, with a very particular protagonist. It is a very engaging read. But I think it's worth mentioning that as Kim tries to comment on so much of, of the hypocrisy that surrounds us, she inevitably stretches the plot and the criticism a bit too thin. Her efforts are commendable. And the result is an offbeat and very, very engaging book that I think you should read for sure. Now, what is The Trunk about? Written in first person, The Trunk is the story of No In-ji. No In-ji is a 29-year-old woman who works as a field wife at NM. So they call it NM, which means new marriage, which is a secret VIP department in a very popular matchmaking service called Wedding and Life. So as a field wife, In-ji is assigned to customers who choose her, not us, choose her as a wife in a fixed-term marriage. So as professional spouses, NM's employees, they are supposed to be perfect wives or husbands. So their tasks range from household chores to sex, whatever the customer wants. So they are supposed to be perfect spouses, okay? The thing is, the marriage, is a fixed-term marriage. that means that the marriage ends without any emotional baggage they have to deal with, okay? And they pay a lot of money for their service, of course. Now, In-ji has been at the company for 6 years, and she has had 4 different marriages. So she's a very experienced, borderline misanthropic woman who now knows exactly how to do her job very well, but at the same time she knows how to protect her own sanity. But after the end of her 4th marriage, you notice that In-ji, she's quickly approaching her 30s, and she feels that there is some sort of emptiness in her life because she doesn't know why her life is exactly the way it is. So the trunk describes 1 year in In-ji's life. This 1 year starts when her 4th marriage ends, and she soon finds out that this last husband of hers, he asked for a rematch. That means she is going to be assigned to be his wife for another year. She accepts the assignment, but in between these 2 assignments, so these 2 marriages, she checks on her best friend, Shi-jung, her neighbor, grandma, so she calls her neighbor grandma, and her parents as well. She also goes on a blind date, and this is important. She goes on a blind date with Tae-sung, who is a very strange fella. He's obsessed with rice cakes, and In-ji clearly and very loudly rejects him, but he refuses to accept her rejection. During this 1 year in In-ji's life, she's forced to face her past, her present, and her future. And during this process, she ends up discovering new sides to her friends, to her life, to her company, to herself that she never knew existed. The trunk has very little dialogue and heavily relies on In-ji's musings, memories, and descriptions of things, okay? The book doesn't really have a clear-cut central plot. Instead, it relies on several different storylines that weave their way through In-ji's life, okay? And even though you have lots of conflicts that are raised throughout the story, none of them are explored in detail or resolved, to be honest. The most thrilling of these storylines actually leads to a very, very incredibly open ending that feels more like a cliffhanger than anything else. So I was fairly frustrated when I reached the ending of the book, and I was like, what? What happens next? So the universe of the trunk is populated by these elusive storylines that are never given enough time to breathe, because characters come and go, and each of them raises a question in In-ji's mind. So you see In-ji's comments on the entire situation. And then at the end of the day, I think this is sort of on purpose. I think this is the goal of the novel. In-ji's perspective and analysis of the situation is given more weight than the problem itself, because the trunk discusses structural challenges, problems that are too ingrained in society to be fixed by a single woman. So the trunk willingly forgoes plot to focus on social commentary. We become witnesses and confidants to In-ji's reflections, and I think at some point we understand that because In-ji is a very cold and very cynical protagonist, but we understand that cynicism because I think it's easily justified by the fact that Inji is able to identify the absurdities around her, but she's not able to fix them. And she knows that. So Inji's female rage is very much present, but Inji's female rage is detached and wary, as if she's resigned to the fact that this is the world we live in and there isn't much that we can do about it. So the trunk is a blunt, unsentimental and morally gray exploration of marriage, family and gender. Inji lives in a world, both personal and public, in which love is nothing but a commodity. So whether familial, platonic or romantic, love in the trunk is misunderstood, is extreme, is obsessive, is superficial, is egocentric. And the society around Inji is fully held in the chokehold of capitalism, in which anyone or anything can be bought or sold. It is strange how the trunk at the end of the day is too similar to our society to be called dystopian. I don't think this is a dystopian novel, because Inji's struggles as a woman, as a daughter, as an employee, they hit way too close to home sometimes. So I think despite embellishments, of course, Kim managed to paint a very realistic picture of Korean contemporary society. I think contemporary society in general, not just Korean, to be honest, with a protagonist that is way too tired of the world's bigotry to care about what people think she should be doing or who she should be. So Inji is sarcastic and outspoken, and she questions absolutely everything. And I think that's the secret of The Trunk, a novel. I think it is cathartic to see Inji question the institution of marriage, question the role of women in society, question notions of sexuality. But then Inji is also forced to deliberate about parental expectations, intergenerational conflict, about queer culture, about capitalism, about the nature of empathy, what it's like to be human. And as she critically explores all these topics, it feels like Kim is trying to get all the evils of society and put all of them under a magnifying glass. But you can't help but relate. So there are moments when you're reading the novel and you're like, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh haha, and you're like, you chuckle and you're like, oh yeah, I know how he feels, because we've all been Inji at least once in our lives. Inji's honest exploration of conformity and societal norms is unconventional and very invigorating, but it is a little bit superficial. So you imagine, I mentioned all those things. They are all very difficult topics to discuss. And the book is not even 250 pages long. So I think Kim was very eager to put all of those topics under close scrutiny. But at the end, it's like I mentioned before, you don't have time to breathe in a novel, let's say. You don't have time for these ideas to breathe. So The Trunk ends up being a novel that tries to discuss a lot without really appreciating the complexities within all these subjects. So Inji's musings and criticism of the world feels a bit too cursory at times, and the delivery doesn't really hit all the right notes all the time. But it is still a very interesting, very enjoyable, and very thought-provoking novel that gives voice to women, and I think it's a novel that encourages us to openly dispute the traditional models that suffocate us every day. So The Trunk is a special kind of book. It's not your, I don't think it's your, it doesn't really fit a clear category, to be honest. But I wanted to make another comment before I go. I want to thank Collab. So Collab translated this book. Collab is actually an Australian initiative. It's a workshop, or it was a workshop, I'm not sure if they are still doing it, but it was a workshop that brought together students and academics and professionals, and they worked together to translate this book, and I love it. I love the translation. I think thanks to them, the universe of The Trunk and Inji's musings, they feel alive and they feel very natural. And I think it helped me relate to Inji's voice as well, because at the end of the day, I felt like sometimes the words here were my own muffled screams, you know, the things that I always think about when things happen to me, and I always think to myself exactly what Inji is thinking to herself. Now, I have the impression that Netflix, The Trunk, and Gim's The Trunk, they are two completely different things. I think whether or not you enjoy the show, if you are here after watching the show and you want to know more about the book, whether or not you enjoy the show, make sure to read the book. But remember that here, this is not a thriller. Here you don't have any mysterious trunks washing ashore anywhere. You don't have any husbands who are obsessed with their ex-wives. You don't have a husband who is taking pills all the time. I don't know if you guys have watched the promotional video for it. This book and the show you watched, they are two completely different things. But The Trunk is well worth a read if you are looking for a contemporary and very unusual analysis of the society we live in, and a very feminist one as well. So I hope I cleared up some misunderstanding when it comes to The Trunk. If you haven't read it yet, only grab this book if you are looking for a social commentary novel and not a thriller, okay? If you have read it, please write in the comments what you thought of it. And yes, after the show airs, let's see the differences between the novel and the TV show. I will definitely be watching The Trunk, that comes out tomorrow. So yesterday on the Blossom review, we had a complete calendar of releases for both J-dramas and K-dramas coming out in December. And tomorrow, this review of The Trunk will be on the Blossom review. If you would rather read it, it will be there tomorrow afternoon. And come back next week. Next week we'll be talking about K-dramas. We have a lot of K-dramas ending this week, and well, starting and ending like The Trunk. So we'll be talking about K-dramas next week. I hope you like the video. I hope you subscribe, and I hope to see you very soon. If you celebrate Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving. I hope you enjoy your day with your loved ones. If you don't, enjoy your day. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you next week. Thank you very much for coming.